I hope you're all keeping well during the lockdown. Have a go at this through Mortise and Tenon joint. I'm going to be cutting the mortise in this length of timber and the tenon on this end. The tenon will then go through the mortise and we should have a nice tight joint line along here. Now this material has been prepared the same thickness so that it will be flush on both sides when we're finished. I've chosen my mortise chisel to be approximately 1/3 of the thickness of the wood that we're joining. And the next step is to adjust our mortise gauge so it is the same width as the chisel. We adjust the pins on the mortise gauge until the points are exactly the width of our mortising chisel. Using the engineer's square and a marking knife, we mark for the shoulder line of our joint. We mark the length of the mortise a little shorter on each end than the width of the adjoining piece. We now adjust the fence on our mortising gauge so that it's roughly in the centre of our work. So we can now mark from one end of the mortise to the other and if I mark those in pencil you'll be able to see where they are. With our marked out mortise clamped firmly to the bench above one of the bench legs for support, we can now chop out our mortise. We first set our mortise chisel bevel pointing towards the middle of the mortise, just inside the end of our mark. Make sure it's square and sight from the end of the work to make sure that it's parallel with the sides. A couple of strikes. Lift the chisel out, move it down the line a little bit. Set it square between the gauge lines, parallel to the sides, and strike again. Now we push the chisel forward towards its back, then rock it on the bevel, and a chip comes out, and we've started our mortise. We work down the line exactly the same way. Got the chisel between the gauge lines, square, parallel to the sides, strike it, push it forwards, rock it against the bevel, our next chip emerges. And when we're approaching the other end, we turn our chisel round so the back of the chisel is now facing the outside of the mortise. Set it again inside the end of the mortise, between the gauge lines, parallel to the sides, couple of strikes, lift the chisel out, push it into the gap we've got whilst it's leaned forward a bit, and then lever the last chip out. And then we go back to the beginning of the mortise and start again. And we repeat the process until we're as deep as we want to go, or in this case, where we're chopping the mortise right the way through, we'll go to about halfway, flip the work over and work from the other side. So join me when I get through to the other side. Well, I've chopped through to the other side now, and I'm just trying to remove some of the waste. I took care not to chop or let my chisel continue down into my bench top. Sometimes it's advisable to put a scrap piece of hardwood underneath or a piece of MDF underneath when you're chopping right the way through. So that's got most of the waste out. Move up a little closer to that final gauge mark and chop about halfway. And because what we're trying to remove here is so thin, the action of the bevel pushing the chisel against the end of the mortise won't cause it to extend the mortise any further than we want it to. So we just creep up on it and we should end up with a nice crisp. Put our chisel into our knife line and just pair this final one with a bit of downward pressure, and that's lovely. And we'll work to the other end as well. And again, feed the chisel into the knife line and press. Now careful when we get this waste out that we don't lean against the ends of the mortise and round those nice sharp cuts over. And now I can flip the work over and finish from the other side. And that's a nice tightly cut mortise. Now just to check finally that these are cut nice and square at the end, I put the chisel in tight against the end, check with the engineer's square, and that's lovely. I'll do the same at both ends and on both sides and make any slight adjustments if necessary just by hand pairing the end grain in the mortise. To prepare cutting the tenons, remove a little wedge of material between the shoulder line that we marked earlier and the actual tenon area with a chisel, and this will leave a little shoulder against which to run our saw. Do that all the way around the component. We've marked the cheeks of our tenons using our marking gauge, working off the same finished side as we did when we marked for the mortise. Run lines down from both of the shoulder marks that we made through all our waist, and then I've just highlighted them by running a pencil along there and marking out the waist. And we need to saw within the waist when we cut the cheeks. But first of all, we're going to cut the cross cut at the end of the cheeks. Cut down to the mortise gauge line. And just stay a little bit shy of it, and we can creep up on it when we've cut down the cheeks. The waist side of the line. And if we then just test our rough tenon in our mortise, I think you can hear it's nice and tight. So when we've cleaned that up, it should be a lovely fit. Now we can use a chisel, carefully pare away at the surface until we're nice and smooth. I prefer to use one of these Japanese files. If we keep flat between the two edges, almost acts like a plane. And whilst we're here, I'm going to use my chisel just to square down the shoulder lines. Put it into the knife mark and press. And again, press. And just clear up into the corner. Now we need to mark for the length of our tenon, and I've marked off round here on pencil with pencil. I can just place the component where I want it, transfer those lines, it's supposed to be centered, so if I use a finger gauge on the one side and don't change it and do the other side, that should give us a good indication. And what I'll do is at the very end I'll just cut to that line, check the fit, and once it's perfect I'll extend the cut down to the shoulder. So I'm just going to cut the width of the, or length of the tenon. And I'll just check by cutting it into the very end, which is the waste material. And take our mortise and see how close we are. And actually, well, that speaks for itself really. That's lovely. Now, after just a little bit of work with the Japanese file, just to tidy it off, we have a good push fit joint with tight joint lines, very slightly off flush, just feel it with my fingertips. So we'll glue that and then plane it up. Couple of strokes of the plane and that's perfectly flush now. Use a block plane to bring it down close to the same level. Then use our smoother just to finish the job off. The through mortise and tenon. Give it a go. Look after yourselves and don't forget to subscribe to see videos every day during the COVID-19 problems.